couple of other issues. Issue which I've been following closely for a couple of years now is in relation to I call it the private certification PI insurance crisis. Certifiers have to be licensed in Queensland. They're required with the QBCC, and they're required to have PI insurance. But they haven't been able to get PI insurance without for full coverage, particularly in relation to combustible cladding. So there's been an exemption carved out for them. Now, I think I read some sort of minutes of a meeting the other day where, which was published on the Department of Housing, Public Works and Housing website, where the previous signalled intentions was that I think it was June next year the exemption was in place, but it's been agreed that would be extended for another 12 months. I haven't seen anything other than come out other than the minutes of the meetings on the department's website. But can you add any sort of clarity or better explain it to them what I have just done?
Sure. So there's been a significant shift in the insurance world in the last 2 years, and so a lot of what's happening here actually started overseas, and instructions were issued from head offices in England, etc. That the businesses here were to look at all their products that were high risk and low cost. And probably most of the insurance products that get sold into the building industry fit those two criteria.
Not many things outside that.
Yeah. And unfortunately, certification and the insurance that's required was at the top of the list. And so early last year, certifiers saw their premiums going from, the sort of $10,000 to $15,000 range to $40,000 to $60,000. And these are small businesses. These are 1- and 2-man shows. So that's a lot of extra money that they have to generate just to cover the insurance and their ability to stay in business. And in addition to that, the clauses that were being included in the premiums were fairly limiting. The result has been that the certifiers feel they're now in the position that if they make one mistake, they're out of business. And so we were, as an industry, I was pretty nervous about what was going to happen because without certifiers in Queensland, we don't have a building industry. And while the government, reminded us that local authorities, councils, were under the legislation were certifiers of last resort. So, despite the fact most local governments got out of certification many years ago, the legislation still says that you can walk into any council and lodge a building application. Now, the reality is when you do that, the council will accept your application. They will then open the yellow pages and find a local private building certifier to assess that application for you. So it was a bit frustrating because the state said, oh, look, don't worry, it's all okay because local governments, are the certifier of last resort. But there aren't any councils in Queensland that still run a certification business. They all got out of it a long time ago. And, when we spoke to the councils, they all went, apart from the fact very few of them had any appetite to get back into that business. They all said, oh, we're not resourced, we don't even have any desks we can sit certifiers at, where would we put them? And so there was a fair bit of panic in the second half of last year about what was going to happen. The QBCC, you're quite right, there's a requirement under the QBCC legislation that certifiers have to be licensed and they have to have insurance. The QVCC, to their credit, took a fairly pragmatic approach and said, we will not cancel anybody's licence just because they haven't been able to obtain appropriate insurance. So providing they make their application, providing they pay their licence fee, and providing they supply us with evidence saying, you know, this is what they've been quoted, we will take that under consideration for a period of time. So it was, as I said, it was probably a pragmatic approach under fairly difficult circumstances. Feedback this year so far is that premiums haven't continued to increase. So they appear to have stayed at about the same level. Now, you know, whether, you know, that's a cost on the business, and whether that ongoing cost is sustainable in the long term, I'm not sure. You know, there were a lot of certifiers that I spoke to who said, oh, you know, I'm getting too old for this rubbish. Yeah. It might be time to get out. And that's an additional concern with the certification profession, is that most of them are middle-aged. Yep. There's not a lot of young people getting into the certification profession. You know, and so it's an additional straw that will eventually break the camel's back, I think. It's not an issue that's gone away. I think it has been swept aside by COVID and some other things, but it's certainly sitting there as a bit of a sleeper issue that we need to keep a very close eye on.